Opening credits. Bearing his baby. A BBW pregnancy bear shifter romance short story. By Summer Cooper. Lovie Books. Chapter 1. Angel stared into the mirror, seeing a reflection far different to the one she'd had a year ago. Her nose was straight now, leaner, the bumps and crookedness gone. Her cheekbones were the same as before, but without the scars that had covered them previously. Turning her face to the left, she saw her honey brown eyes surrounded by smooth skin, not the scar tissue that used to be there. Thinking back to a year ago, she remembered how the slightest touch would send an
censored
deep into the broken bones under her skin. Her jaw had been so broken that her face was misshapen. She could remember the blood, the pain, and the bruising that took months to go away. That was all gone now, thanks to a charity for battered people operating out of New England, called Rose. An organization dedicated to helping people, who were victims of domestic violence, regain their self-esteem by repairing cosmetic damage to their bodies, even going so far as to repair dental injuries for these battered people. Rose had paid for all of her surgeries, and the therapy she'd needed after her husband Michael tried to kill her. He'd almost succeeded too. Angel looked in the mirror, losing focus on her eyes as her brain replayed that night in her mind. She had married Michael when she was 19, and totally oblivious to the ways of the world. He'd virtually kept her a prisoner, only allowing her to leave their home if he went with her. She wasn't allowed visitors, and he never brought anyone home with him. Angel wasn't even allowed to see her father, a widower who was in frail health. A year into their marriage, the abuse had begun, first with just a slap when she broke his favorite coffee mug, then escalating to full-on assaults that saw her knocked to the floor and kicked until she screamed piteously. He broke her ribs after he found out she was pregnant. She wasn't pregnant long around Michael. He'd kicked her until she lost both of the babies that she'd conceived. That final night, Michael snapped when he found out that instead of being left millions in her father's will, Angel was only left a few $100,000 unless she divorced him. If she divorced Michael, she'd get all of the money, otherwise it was going to a shelter for battered women. Michael had accused her of conspiring with her father to humiliate him, whom she hadn't spoken to since her wedding day 9 years ago. He told her that the only reason he'd married her was because of the money, that he'd always had a mistress who had his children, and that he was only waiting for the money so he could get rid of her. His verbal humiliation included telling her how useless she was, how she wasn't any good in bed, how she disgusted him because she'd become overweight and ugly over time. Then he'd picked up the forks they'd received as wedding presents off of the kitchen table, and held her down as he used them to shred her face. In anger fueled by his violence against her, Michael had beaten her until every bone in her face was shattered, and both of her arms were broken in several places. Despite Angel's obvious need for medical care, Michael left her to visit his mistress, telling Angel that if she had any kind of decency in her she'd die before he got back, so he wouldn't have to live with her anymore. He then left her in their home, deep in the woods of Maine, to die on her own. Choking up blood, beyond feeling anything but pain and a desperate will to live, Angel waited for Michael to leave, waited until she couldn't hear his truck on the gravel of their long driveway anymore. Then she slipped on her shoes, prized the door open with numb fingers, and walked out of the house and into town. She walked until someone in the street shouted when they saw Angel's appearance. She then collapsed, waking up 2 weeks later in a hospital bed, covered in bandages and plaster casts. Angel asked for a mirror when the nurse came in to change her bandages, and wept as she saw her face bloody and bruised, covered in stitches and looking misshapen. A guard stood at her door, but no visitors came. Michael was in jail. Apparently she'd told the doctors that treated her when she was admitted into hospital, that Michael was the one who'd assaulted her. Angel didn't remember anything but the beating, the words Michael spoke, and every single thing he'd done to her. She remembered it every single day of her life now. Angel was learning to deal with it though. The newly smooth texture of her face no longer revealed the horrific scarring or damaged bones that it once had. She had a new face now, and it was much better than the one she'd had. The doctors had had to reshape her nose, jaw, and cheekbones, but the effect was attractive and not as horrifying as she thought it might be. Her old appearance, a tangled web of scars, had frightened small children and even adults. Now she could go out in public again without being stared at. Soon, she would be leaving the complex network of safe houses and secured buildings that she'd lived in for the last year. She'd asked her father's lawyer to donate the bulk of the money that she wasn't going to receive to Rose, or a similar non-profit organization. Michael refused to sign the divorce papers, so she wasn't going to get the money, but she hoped she could at least influence how it was used in that small way. The organization had kept her safe, had helped her to heal, and now Michael was in jail. She was safe, but she still wasn't prepared to return to her home. She was taking her money and heading to Mexico, far away from Michael. She knew how the justice system in America worked. He was probably out of jail already, despite being imprisoned for 5 years for what he'd done to her. And he'd be coming for vengeance, if the letters he sent to the house via his mistress were any indication. Angel put the mirror away, gathered up the few bags she had, and walked out of the room that had been her home for the last 3 months. She'd moved every few months, following doctors and hospitals to reclaim some of her dignity. She'd done that, and now she was going to live her life without the fear of her face making life harder. Now if she could just erase the emotional and mental scars Michael left her with, her life might be perfect. A year later, Angel found herself emerging from the pool at her apartment, brushing her honey-brown hair out of her eyes. Her hair tended to float around her head as she swam because it only came to her chin, which she thought must make a funny picture, but the heat of Mexico demanded that she either suffer with long hair or cut it. She'd lasted 3 months before she took a pair of scissors to it herself and cut it all off. Looking around the complex in the moonlight, she couldn't believe how unbelievably content she was. She'd come to Mexico and found an apartment for rent that was really just one big house turned into apartments. Angel still hadn't seen anyone else in the other apartments, and that was just fine with her. Her bad memories were starting to fade as well now. She wasn't tormented nightly with the night terrors that left her as immobile as she'd been that last night with Michael, terrified to even make a sound in case it set off even more violence. Feeling too petrified to even fend off his attack, as the brutality of it increased. Her dreams were returning to a semblance of normalcy now, and she spent more time asleep at night, rather than showering to remove the sheen of sweat and fear from her body, while wishing the nightmares would wash away as easily as the sweat did. She'd even stopped thinking about suicide now, the will to live once sapped by the depression she suffered during the course of healing, surgeries, and worst of all, the night terrors that replayed the violence nightly. That depression was slowly fading now, replaced with the optimism and will to live that had gotten Angel this far. Angel was losing weight now, becoming fit from her swimming and bike rides into the nearest town for supplies. She was busy painting artworks of the desert area she now lived in. Her therapy was starting to work, and the self-defense classes she'd taken gave her more confidence. She still wasn't sure she could fend off Michael in psychotic rage mode, but she had more confidence she could get away from him at least. Being small and delicate had its disadvantages, but it also meant she could be wily when cornered. Walking out of the pool, Angel wrapped her small frame with a towel that almost swallowed her. She was only 1 inch off 5 feet tall. Towels could serve as blankets for her. Brushing aside thoughts of Michael, she looked around when she heard a noise. She didn't have her contacts in because she was swimming, but she could see someone moving boxes into the other apartment next to hers. Curious but not wanting to disturb the new neighbor as they were moving in, she crept behind one of the trees that surrounded the pool. Squinting, she watched as a man moved a box from a truck, stepping under the porch light before stepping into the apartment. Angel's breath caught in her,
censored,
her heart pounding as her body prepared to flee in response to her fear. She couldn't see the man well, but he looked just like Michael. Oh, please don't let him be here now. Angel couldn't think after seeing the man go into the apartment. She just ran into her own apartment, locking the door as the man shouted a hello to the sound of locks clicking. Angel turned to the door, falling against it, as her reaction to the adrenaline rushing through her system left her limp and too weak to stand straight up. She was shaking, panicking, and wondering if she should call the police. There really wasn't a police department in this part of Mexico that she could call, and she hadn't really learned enough Spanish yet to make it worth her time to call them. "All right," she said to herself, "calm down, Angel. Maybe it's not Michael. It could be anybody. Lots of men have dark hair and are that tall. Loads of men wear jeans and t-shirts. Loads of them. Come on now, calm down." She stepped away from the door, peering out from behind her curtain but unable to see anything. Apparently the man had finished unloading the truck and had turned off the porch light. She wasn't going to get another glimpse of him tonight, it seemed. Turning off her own lights, Angel walked into her bedroom, then the bathroom to turn the shower on. So much for being better. Her first urge was to take a shower, not to remove the chlorine from the pool, but to wash away the smell of her own fear. Sighing, Angel stepped under the hot water, closing her eyes as the water relaxed her. She'd just have to wait and see. There was no reason to panic. Yet. The next morning, Angel woke up early, put her contacts in, had a light breakfast, and took up a post at her window, staring through the curtain at the door to the other apartment. She munched on some granola she'd put in a bowl, and watched. She quickly grew bored when nothing happened. The man didn't leave, didn't open the door, and didn't come out with a big sign that announced his name in block letters. Growing frustrated, Angel went to grab a banana but thought better of it. Eating her way through the stress was not going to work. As Angel eased back over to her perch by the window and settled herself onto the bar stool she'd placed there, she saw the other door open and the man came out into the light. With her contacts in, she saw that the man was completely different. Much taller than Michael, with a darker hair color, this man was very different from Michael. Michael wouldn't have worn shorts like those either, he was strictly a pants kind of man. This man was much more muscular and tanned as well. Actually, he was pretty damn hot, Angel thought, but not for me. Nope. Her fear and curiosity relieved, Angel started to move but stopped as the man went out to the pool and took his shirt off. Oh, definitely much more muscular than Michael. There wasn't an ounce of fat on this man, just brawn and muscle. Certainly out of her league in any case. Angel finally tore herself away from the window when the man disappeared under the water, determined to get back to her painting. As she painted, she told herself dozens of reasons why she should stay away from men, why she didn't want another relationship, even if it was only
censored.
Sure, the guy was hot, but was it worth more pain? She'd had enough of that to last a lifetime, and Angel told herself she wasn't ready for any of it, even after 2 years. She just wasn't ready yet. Then Angel lost herself in her work, and forgot about the world outside of her tiny little studio. She watched the man for a month, noting that he also had no visitors, rarely left the complex, and spent most of his time either in the pool or in his home. He was also a quiet man. Angel never heard him moving around the apartment, never heard noise coming from the place, and never heard him on the phone, something easily done with walls as thin as theirs were. She considered speaking to him, to see if he was all right, running from the law, anything to have a conversation with him. He seemed lonely and Angel was lonely too, maybe they could just be friends? Friends wasn't hard to do. She hadn't had a friend in a long time, but she remembered that it wasn't too hard to be friends with people. Stepping out onto her upstairs patio, she looked out towards the cactus grove, when she heard strange noises coming from that direction. The wind was blowing, and it carried the sound with it. A snuffling sound, with the occasional crash as something large moved through the underbrush. Angel moved closer to the ledge, looking down as the animal moved out into the light. A bear. What was a bear doing out here? Angel didn't even think Mexico had bears, but maybe they did. After all, there was one downstairs now. What could she do to get rid of it? She didn't see any lights on at the neighbor's place, so she couldn't call out to him, and she had no other way to contact him. She looked around and saw a wine bottle she'd left out from dinner, and thought maybe she could scare it off by throwing the bottle at it. She'd have to go down and clean up the glass, but her thoughts broke off as the bear started to take on the shape of a man, a very
censored
man, and the wine bottle slipped from her hand. It shattered as it hit the ground below, and the man looked up to see her. It was the neighbor. Holy cow, bear. The neighbor was some kind of werewolf, werebear. Holy cow! Angel's mind spun in circles as she tried to decide what to do. Staring right into his eyes, Angel panicked and did the only thing she knew how to do as a wide smile spread across his face, and that was to run. She ran straight into the apartment and did not look back. She closed all of her curtains, locked the door, turned the television up loud, and hid in her bed for the rest of the night, wondering if she was going crazy or if she'd really seen what she knew good and well she'd seen. Angel spent the next few days convincing herself she had not actually seen the neighbor go from bear to super stud. It was a trick of the moonlight, that was all, just a trick of the light. She kept telling herself that, but still avoided him when she saw he was outside. She almost managed to convince herself of that, until 3 days later when she bumped into him as she was running out of her door to go to the store before it closed. Angel ran straight into his
censored
and was shocked when she suddenly came to a complete stop. Looking up, she wasn't sure whether to laugh, faint, or run back into the safety of her apartment as the man grinned down at her and growled, opening his eyes wide playfully. "Don't eat me," was all she managed to get out before she actually, really truly fainted. Like some sappy heroine from an old movie, she just sagged against the man as her mind simply refused to take any more in. Luckily, he caught her before she fell. Chapter 2. Angel's eyes fluttered as she became aware of a voice singing sweetly not far away from her. The song came from a male voice, deep and stirring. The sweet mournful sound made her want to comfort the singer, to take away the sadness in that voice. Opening her eyes, Angel looked up to see her neighbor was the singer, singing an old song about a man losing the love of his life and desperately wanting her back. She smiled at the man, but the smile turned into a flush as she realized she'd fainted and he'd caught her. Her cheeks flamed deeper as she remembered why she'd fainted. Shifting quickly, she pulled her legs under her, preparing to run out of the place at the first sign of danger. Looking around, she realized she must be in his home. Dark masculine colors and dark leather furniture dominated the room, which was shaped exactly as her own was. Angel had decorated her side with pastel, light colors that inspired a coolness that was necessary in the heat out here. She liked his place though, but that didn't stop her from being terrified of him. She met his eyes again, unasked questions obvious in her dark eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you, if that's what you're worried about. I'm sorry I frightened you. I guess my attempt at being funny fell flat. Would you like a drink?" Oh, he did have a beautiful voice, Angel thought. No. I'm fine, what time is it? I was rushing out to meet the train, I need more art supplies. I guess I've missed it for the day now. I'll just try tomorrow, I guess. Please excuse me, I'll get out of your place now. Thank you very much. Angel stood preparing to leave when the man held his hand out, hoping to stop her. "If you need to get somewhere, maybe I can take you? I have a vehicle, it wouldn't be a problem, and I'm not doing anything today. I'd be glad to get out, actually." "Oh no, I wouldn't want to be a bother, I'll just go tomorrow. It's really no big deal," Angel said, trying to walk away again as her resolve began to dissolve. She steeled herself, however, he was male after all. It wouldn't be no problem, ma'am, it'd be a break for me, really. Also, I'm sorry I haven't introduced myself. I'm Felix Waters. As I said, I wouldn't mind getting out of here for a little while and maybe you can show me around a little bit." Her knees practically melted as his southern accent somehow increased. She wanted to listen to him read books, newspapers, cereal boxes, anything just to keep him talking. "Down girl," she told herself, "you've been alone a long time but still, think of your safety. Although going to town in a car would take a lot less time than taking the train, going in, then coming back on the train. Well then Felix, I'm Angel. Nice to meet you. If you're sure it's no problem?" "Not a problem at all. Shall we head out now? Are you feeling better?" he asked with concern. "Oh sure, I'm fine. Just got a little worked up, I guess. I do apologize for that. You must think I'm an idiot." "Not at all," Felix said as they walked towards his truck. "It was thoughtless of me, and I do apologize again. My mother would beat me silly if she knew I'd done that. Oh, I'm sure that smile of yours would get you out of it," Angel said with a laugh, then blushed as she realized what she'd said. She looked away, rolling her eyes at herself. Sheesh, Angel, dork much? It would if she hadn't passed away recently. Her and my father are both gone now. Oh, I'm sorry. Mine are both gone too. I miss them dearly. We have something in common then. We're both orphans. Felix smiled at her reassuringly with sympathy. There is that, Angel said back, looking away as she wondered if he really had turned into a bear or not. Surely she just dreamed it or hallucinated. Maybe Michael had damaged her brain? He didn't seem to have any bear qualities. He didn't even have hair on the back of his hands, or long teeth or anything. Just a normal, if rather tall man, who also happened to be very fit. Felix drove Angel to the shop for her art supplies, asking about her line of work, and she told him about her painting. She wasn't really selling any of it right now, but she hoped to one day. Felix told her about his information technology career, a job where he could pick up freelance work online and still travel as he chose. Angel went on to show him other shops he may be interested in, and then they stopped at a cafe for some coffee and a light dinner. Over the next few weeks, Angel didn't learn anything about how old Felix was, but she guessed in his 30s, but she did learn that he was 6'5" tall. Practically a foot and a half taller than she was. It made walking around awkward sometimes. People would stare at them, but she enjoyed his company. They spent their days by the pool, relaxing and talking about their work, and during the nights, one would cook, or they'd go out together to one of the local eateries. Sometimes one of them would be working on something, and they'd stay in their homes, but the other one would always go in to check on the other. Angel felt like she was really building a friendship with Felix, one built on mutual respect, caring, and kindness. Felix had never tried to
censored
her or take their relationship in another direction, and she was grateful for that, but at the same time, she was starting to have feelings for him. She had nobody but him to talk to. She'd lost contact with all of her friends over the years because of Michael, and any family she might have left was lost to the winds. After her life with Michael, Angel wasn't sure how to approach Felix, or if she even should. Michael had made her feel useless, as though she'd been a terrible housewife, an even worse person and unworthy of love. So many times Michael wouldn't be able to perform in the bedroom, and he'd tell her it was her fault. She wasn't exciting enough or sexy enough, but if she tried to dress in a provocative way, he just called her a whore. Michael also hit her more when he couldn't perform, and that combined with how perfunctory he was at it, giving her no pleasure at all, it made Angel cringe at the idea of changing her relationship with Felix. She now knew most of the problem had actually been with Michael, not anything she'd ever done wrong, but still, there were little niggling doubts that she couldn't get rid of. Angel wished she could because Felix was a wonderful man, generous, sweet, funny, and he was just generally a really great guy. He helped clean up and never complained about anything. He'd even stop to help a family stuck on the side of the road when their car broke down, ferrying them all into town in his truck with them. She was just too frightened to open up that much again. Michael had been sweet and funny when they first got together, and he'd learned that she came from a family with money. He'd take her out, buy her things, and ply her with wine and roses. He completely changed on their wedding night, and it had just grown worse over time, until she was completely isolated and alone. Angel didn't think she could get through that again. At the same time, she was starting to see that not all men were like Michael. Not all relationships were the same, so maybe in time she could thaw out a little and take a chance. For now, she was happy having a friend. Angel had even opened up a little bit to Felix about Michael, not going into detail about it, but she let him know it hadn't been a happy marriage, and that it was part of the reason she was in Mexico now. Felix told her he'd never been married, too consumed in his work to even date most of the time. He'd miss dates, special events, and women just didn't like that. He'd come to Mexico to have some time to himself. He'd made enough money to live comfortably off of now, after selling some kind of software, and he just wanted to work on projects that needed help, such as nonprofits that were building web pages and such. Peace and quiet, they decided, was what they were both after, even though they were rarely quiet when together. That lack of quiet suited them just fine though as the days passed and their friendship grew. Angel smiled as she saw Felix heading to her place with the post, as she looked up from the dishes she was doing to look out of the window. Her smile slipped as he stared at one of the envelopes. For some reason Felix looked upset, and she wondered if he'd received some bad news. She hoped not, and dried her hands as she left the dishes in the sink. She heard him calling for her as he came in her front door, not even bothering to knock anymore, which brought the smile back, but it quickly disappeared again as he found her in the hallway walking into the living room. Concern etched lines into her face as she walked up to him, a question forming on her lips. "What's wrong, Felix? Have you had bad news?" she asked. "No, it seems you have. I debated giving this to you, but I can't keep it from you." "It's your business," he said after taking a deep breath. Angel's heart rate increased as he spoke, wondering, almost knowing who the letter was from before she saw it. Taking the envelope with trembling hands, Angel looked up at Felix, her fear evident. She didn't want to take the envelope from him. She could almost feel the evil it contained, and she didn't have to look long to know it was from Michael. Felix said it all with his expression, with his words. Her slice of heaven had been discovered. Angel finally dragged her eyes down, looking at the return address. She stumbled back, actually falling, but Felix was there to catch her. He pulled her up in his arms and carried her to her bedroom, sitting her down, and disappeared for a moment as he went for a glass of water. He knelt in front of her once she took the glass, and spoke to her gently. "Angel, whatever it says, whatever that jackass has to say to you, I am here for you and I will protect you. Do you understand me? This changes nothing. You're still my little buddy, and Michael will never hurt you again. I know I don't know exactly what happened with him, but I saw the pain when you spoke about him. I noticed the unspoken words and the way your voice shook when you talked about him, and he will never ever hurt you again, do you hear me? I swear that to you." Angel could only look at Felix. She didn't want to open the envelope, but knowing she had a friend that cared, that promised to be there with her, gave her courage. She tore the seal, pulled out the one piece of paper inside of it, and let the letter flutter open onto her bed. As soon as Felix saw the words, he snatched the paper off of the bed and crumpled it up, but Angel had already seen what it said. In large block letters Michael had typed the words, "I know where you are. Payback time." Chapter 3. I'll be here, Angel. Angel remembered the words as she watched her door shatter, as Michael kicked it down 2 nights later. She'd spent those 2 days preparing a bag in case she needed to run, getting everything ready in case she needed to leave, and had her passports and other papers in a pouch under her shirt. The words Felix had spoken replayed through her mind as Angel ran to her bedroom, hoping to climb through her bedroom window if she could just get the door shut in time and locked. It seemed she was alone again, running from Michael's violence. He'd shown up finally, banging on the door and screaming insults at her. Words like whore, die, and words that were just too ugly to think about, but were far too familiar. The rage was too familiar, and instead of waiting on anyone to save her, she ran. She made it to the bedroom, but Michael came raging through it. He pulled her under him, then threw her on the bed. "Oh, you are going to pay, cow. A year locked up, a year of my life gone for your pitiful trifling ass. You think the last time was bad, you may not make it out of here alive this time. You weren't supposed to the last time either, but oh no, always freaking up my plans, aren't you, Angel? You don't live up to your name very well. I've watched you now with your boyfriend across the way there. Already whoring it up, aren't you? I knew you couldn't keep those legs of yours closed. Now where do I street?" Michael's stream of vicious words were cut off as he seemed to magically fly backwards through the air, and a terrible roar filled the air. Angel sat up, eyes going wide as she saw Felix kick Michael across the room. She huddled on the bed as fists met flesh, as Michael screamed in pain, and she hid her eyes in a pillow, not wanting to see any more violence. She heard the grunts, the growls Felix released with each connection his fists made, and tried to block even that out. The aggression and the violence were horrifying, and she just wanted to be away from it all. Finally, the noises stopped, and she heard Felix telling Michael to get out and not to come back because Felix wouldn't let him live the next time he came near Angel. Words so similar to Michael's, it made Angel tremble even more. She heard Michael pick himself up and stumble out of the door. Lifting her head, Angel looked at Felix with miserable eyes. He was breathing heavily and stumbled a bit as he walked to Angel, a question in his eyes. Her face was red and puffy from crying, her breath hitching in her throat as she sobbed. She couldn't answer, she only hid her face in the pillows again, trying not to scream. Felix picked her up and carried her to his apartment, laying her on his bed as he went in to rinse his hands off. His knuckles were bloody and bruised, but he just gritted his teeth and cleaned the wounds, his ears constantly perked for any sign of Michael's return. When he went back into his bedroom, he found Angel asleep, curled up into the tiniest ball, so small he almost didn't see her under the covers. He changed into sleep pants and got in with her, pulling her to him so that she could sleep, safe in his arms. Angel woke up hours later, confused about where she was, but she smelled Felix's scent, felt his skin beneath her face, and knew where she was. She'd turned her brain off hours earlier, falling asleep as a form of escape. She wasn't thinking, only feeling, and right now she needed to know she was alive. She smoothed her hands down the hard muscles of Felix's.
Censored.
Around his.
Censored.
Which made his hips twitch in his sleep, and a sigh escaped his sleeping lips as her hand moved down over his flat, taut stomach.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
Angel woke again as the sun started to peek through the bedroom window. Survival would not release her brain, and escape was all she could think of. She gathered her clothes and quietly left Felix there sleeping, unaware that she was leaving. She ran to her own apartment, gathered her things, scribbled a note for Felix, and taped it to the remnants of her door as she stole away. The need to escape Michael, the violence she'd seen Felix display, finally overtaking her need to hide from the world, and she ran towards the train station, hoping she would make it there before Felix woke up and came after her. As the plane ascended, Angel stared out the window, trying to distract herself from the trembling that overtook her body now that she was finally fleeing Mexico. It had taken a week of traveling to get to the airport, and then a few more days before she could get a flight out, and she'd been terrified Michael would find her again in that time. She did not want him back, did not want to be anywhere near him, and was fleeing him far more than she was fleeing Felix. Felix had frightened her, however, with his display of violence. He'd shown up finally, he'd protected her, she couldn't fault him there, but the raw power, the roaring sounds that reminded her of the bear she'd once imagined he'd become terrified her. Sure, he'd used that power and that violence to protect her, but it still frightened her, she thought, as she wiped away a tear that had escaped her eye. She turned away from the window as the air hostess came through and gave her the glass of wine she requested. Settling in, Angel let her mind go blank again as she sipped the beverage, knowing a battle would ensue once she landed, and that she would have to face whatever Maine had to dump into her lap. Over the next few weeks, Angel spoke with Michael's probation officer and had him rearrested for stalking. He was taken, ranting and screaming profanities, when he crossed back into America from Mexico, where he was not supposed to be. This time his charges were even more extensive. He was not going to be getting out of jail so easily this time. Angel had also hired a lawyer to successfully get her divorce from Michael finalized. The longer prison sentence he was facing didn't help him as he fought the divorce, and he finally caved and signed the papers 5 months after she left Mexico. She was a free woman now, even though she hadn't felt like she'd been married to Michael for a long time. The legal acknowledgement of that feeling was powerful, however, and she now carried the papers with her wherever she went, just to keep them safe. Angel was also avoiding Felix. She'd shut down her email accounts he knew about, and turned off her mobile phone from Mexico so she didn't have to ignore his phone calls anymore. She regretted that when she visited the doctor 3 months after fleeing Mexico, and her doctor came back into the exam room to explain to her why she was feeling so tired, why she was gaining weight and sick all the time. She wasn't sick or dying of some cancer, she was just pregnant. Chapter 4. Angel walked back into the apartment she'd left so many months before, and noticed the door had been replaced, but that her belongings were still in place. Walking throughout the dark apartment, she saw that everything was as she'd left it, except the clothes she'd worn that last evening. They were now washed and neatly folded on the bed. Angel still had quite a few months left on her lease, and decided to come back when she'd learned she was pregnant. It had taken a little doing, and arranging medical care had taken even longer, but she was here finally. Her memories of the place were more good than bad, and she had hoped Felix might still be here. Looking at the apartment next to hers, she saw that the windows were dark and the curtains had been drawn. Felix's truck wasn't in the drive either, and nobody had been in the driveway for a while, if the lack of tracks was any indication. Rubbing her belly, very round and full as she was only a month away from giving birth, she wondered how she was going to find him. She tried to remember the complicated email he'd given to her, but couldn't find the right combination. All of her emails were returned with errors. Walking up the stairs to the patio at the top of the apartment, she remembered that night when she'd thought Felix was a shape-shifting creature. How very silly she'd been, she thought as she leaned over the ledge there. She enjoyed the scented breeze that lifted her much longer hair, and wondered how she'd find Felix in this mess. She couldn't even find him under his name in social media. She walked down to her studio, smiling as she saw the last painting she'd started still resting in the easel. Felix leaning against a palm tree in the darkness, an inviting smile on his full lips greeted her from the canvas, making her heart
censored.
She dreamed of those lips many times since she'd left him, of his body moving beneath hers with urgency and need. She pressed a hand to her forehead and fanned her face. The sudden flush that came over her was something familiar now. Thinking too much about Felix caused her body to react in ways she'd never known it could only a year ago. Angel looked around each room, hoping for some indication of how to get in touch with the man she now missed deeply. It had taken her a while to process the scene in her apartment, but she'd finally come to the conclusion that Felix had not acted out of character for most men, attempting to protect someone they cared about. Yes, he'd been violent, but only to protect Angel, nothing more. She suspected that the violence, the fierceness of his protection, was only an indication of his feelings for her. She hoped so anyway. "We have to find your daddy, baby. Where can he be?" Sitting down at the table in the kitchen, she pondered places she could look next. 8 months had passed since she'd left him without a word. She had to consider that Felix, perhaps, no longer wanted to be a part of her life. Of course, she had to somehow notify him of the child, but she wasn't expecting anything else from him. Sighing, she went into her bedroom to have a nap. It was getting late, and she'd been traveling for 2 days now. She needed a rest. Waking up the next morning, she could swear she smelled pancakes and eggs cooking. She was even certain she could hear the eggs cooking. She dismissed the sound and smell as pregnancy hormones messing with her, and went to the bathroom. Angel felt huge now and ungainly, her balance thrown off by all the weight in the front of her body now, not the back. She was also easily tired now, and despite the fact that she'd just woken up, Angel was already exhausted. Standing up, she waddled down the hallway, wondering what she could prepare for breakfast. Maybe there was something edible left in the cabinets. Otherwise, she'd have to make her way back to town in the car she'd rented for the next 2 months. Angel's steps halted as she came into the kitchen to discover that her hormones might be out of whack, but she hadn't been hallucinating. Food was cooking in her kitchen, and Felix was the one doing the cooking. She wasn't sure what to do or say, and she finally looked down at her belly, knowing she wasn't going to have to explain about being pregnant. That much was obvious. "Well then, do I get a hug or not?" Felix said, holding his arms out to her with a smile. He pulled her gently into his arms, pulling her as tightly as he could to his body, as he leaned his head down to
censored
her on the top of her head. "You seem to be struggling there, little mama. Get your feet up on one of those chairs over there and I'll bring you some breakfast. We need you strong for the coming weeks." "How did you know how to find me?" Angel finally formed a thought cohesive enough to ask. "I've been following you since you left, my love. I'm a computer genius, remember? And I'm tied to those babies. I've known about them since you conceived them." "Them?" What do you mean them? I know I'm huge, but there's only one. Angel replied. No, there are two, a boy and a girl. And I'll explain how I know that after breakfast. Now eat. Felix said as he slipped a plate in front of her, filled with food. Okay, so you've been cyber-stalking me. How come I couldn't find you then? She asked. I've been hiding from you. I wanted you to make the decision for yourself, and to give you time to settle your affairs back home. I knew you were trying to get your divorce finalized, and trying to settle things with the legal system there, so I've been keeping track of you from a distance. Felix set a plate down across from her and started eating, ending the conversation for the moment. Angel watched him as Felix ate, a joyous smile taking over as he got through more pancakes than she'd ever seen one person eat. He hadn't changed at all, but his hair was a little longer and curled at the edges now. She liked his mop of curls better than the short hair he'd had before. His lips were still as sultry as ever, his face the same handsome face she now knew she loved dearly. Her love for Felix far transcended anything she'd ever felt for Michael. She'd only been infatuated with Michael, the presence and his attention blinding her to who he really was. Felix, on the other hand, was genuinely kind and giving, sharing his free time with others who valued the precious commodity he gave so freely. Generous and sweet Felix was a man she admired, not just for his looks but for the person he was. Reaching across the table to him, Angel wanted to take his hand. He reached out to her, his hand swallowing hers as they clasped their hands together. I know why you left, Angel, Felix spoke. You don't have to explain, but I do. Do you want to get in the pool while we talk? It might be more relaxing for you. She agreed and went to the bedroom to strip off. It was only them there, and she was just going to go in.
Censored.
He might as well see the whole load of her now. He was going to be seeing far more of it if he stuck around, as she hoped he would. His presence now reassured her that he was here for the long term, not a short reunion. She slipped on a robe she pulled out of the closet, then waddled out to the pool with him. Felix helped her onto a float, and they held hands as they floated across the pool. You were right, this is probably the most comfortable I've been in months. Thank you, Felix. Now, care to tell me why you think we're having twins? And how you know they're yours? Angel asked with a raised eyebrow. Well, do you remember that first day we met when I growled at you? He stopped to see if she remembered. Well, I saw you the night before, on the patio, and knew you'd seen me come out of the woods and shift. He said with a sheepish smile. Angel would have fallen off of her float if she wasn't so cumbersome. She stared at Felix, her mouth gaping wide. That was real? I didn't dream it. Yes, it was real. I can shift into a bear at will. I was born into it, as were my parents. Our children might be as well. In fact, they likely are because I can sense them already. At the first spark of life, I knew about them. I can't read their thoughts or anything, but I know where they are, how they are doing. Right now, they're happy to be floating with you. Apparently being on hard ground puts strain on your body. Floating here is much better for you and them. So you're what, a werebear? What the hell? I know I saw it, but I'm having a hard time believing it. I know it's real, but still, wow. Angel looked away from him, trying to take it all in, then looked back at him. How old are you? I'm 32, but I may live to be much older. I don't know yet. My parents were 268 and 152 when they died. It's really hard to tell. Also, I'm rich. Very, very rich. Some of it is inheritance, some of it is what I've earned. We're talking billions, babe. Our children will never want for anything. Does that mean I'm going to turn into this thing too? Angel asked. There's a chance that as you give birth you may be changed, but it's rare. We can change you, of course, if you want, but that's up to you. It's a long life, just remember that. If I get to see my children growing up far past the age most people do, I want it. You know I do. I love this baby, these babies rather. They're mine and I'll always love them. I will love them and you for the rest of our lives. When do you want to get married? Felix asked as he pulled her float closer to his. Married? I'm not sure about married, but I love you too, Felix. Now and forever. I didn't know what that meant, but I do now. I really do. Thank you. Angel said, tears filling her eyes as he
censored
her hand, accepting that marriage might be too much for now. She didn't need a piece of paper to love him, only his love in return. Well, that's fine, love, but I'd like to be your husband one day, just to prove to you what a real husband is, if nothing else, to wipe away the terrible memories you must live with. I read about what Michael did to you, and while I'm glad you were helped, I hate that he did all of that to you. I've made a large donation to the foundation that helped you, by the way. I'm sure you're grateful to them. Oh, I am. Without their help, I don't think I'd have survived that ordeal. Organizations such as Rose need all of the help they can get, so they can continue to help the victims of domestic violence. I'm eternally grateful to them. Angel responded. Pulling her off the float gently, Felix pulled Angel to the shallow end of the pool and pulled her to him. Angel giggled and pushed away from him. Oh, I'm too huge to be sexy right now, Felix. Stop teasing me. I don't think I've ever seen a sexier woman, Angel. You have our babies inside of you. You're glowing, you're beautiful, and the most desirable woman I've ever seen. I couldn't ask for more. Felix said as he ran his hands down her body, loving the fullness of her body and how her
censored
floated in the water, their color slightly changed by the hormones raging through her body now.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
As she came back to Earth, Angel thought of the old song she'd heard him singing to her so long ago. Yes, she thought, I would rather go blind too than ever be without him or see him walking away from me. Hugging him close, Angel knew that Felix would only leave if he was forced to, something she'd never do. 2 months later, Angel woke from her nap to the sweet sound of Felix's voice as he sang a song of happiness and love to his children. Arabella and Adam slept peacefully in bassinets at the side of their parents' bed, tiny smiles on their little faces sweetly tempting Angel to wake them just so she could
censored
their precious little faces. Felix saw his wife was awake and moved to her side. How are you feeling, my darling? I'm better than perfect, Felix, but my hip does itch. It's just to the back there. Have I got a bug bite or something? Can you see it? Angel turned over, pulling her nightgown up to let Felix look at the spot. Oh? Felix let slip before he could stop himself. Oh? What does oh mean? Angel asked. Stay calm now. Breathe deep, yes, like that, now close your eyes. What do you notice? Felix asked her. He watched as she looked confused at first, but then wonder filled her face. What is that, Felix? It's like 2 little sparks of light and a weird feeling, like an afterglow of happiness. That's our babies, Angel. You're seeing our babies and feeling their emotions. That emotion part will fade as they age, but you'll always be able to find that spark. If you're looking for them, you'll even see lines sometimes. I remember hearing mothers talking about it. Colored lines will guide you to both babies, no matter where they are. Oh my, that is very cool. What a wonderful gift. Wait. The O. Does that mean something then, this seeing my babies like this? Yes, darling, it does. That itchy feeling is the mark of the bear coming out on your hip. You must have been changed when you had the babies. This is wonderful. I can teach all 3 of you now. Are you all right with this, darling? I guess it's a little too late to ask now, but it is a big step. Dearest husband of mine, it's more than I could have ever asked. I have you, our babies, and a long life ahead of all of us. There was a time when I hoped a short life awaited me, but not anymore. I'll greedily take every single day I'm given. And I do mean greedily. Every day with you is a gift, and I hope we have many more to come. Each parent took a baby then, both eager to hold their creations, and showed them the mark in the shape of a bear paw on their hips, a mark both of their parents wore. We'll have plenty of days, my darling, I promise. You've grown so much, you've become so confident, fierce, and brave. You've been brave your whole life, but now you're something different. I'm glad I'm the one you chose to share that with. A new life for us all, and I couldn't be prouder of you. I love you, babe. I love you too, Felix. Now and always. Thank you for reading my book. If you like this story, I think you'll enjoy my book. Get your copy of Sold to the Werewolf now. Please leave a review if you like this book. That's the best thing you can do to help authors like me, so others can find my books. It can be as long or as short as you'd like. Even a star rating is amazing and appreciated. Thanks in advance. About Summer Cooper. Thank you so much for reading. Without you, it wouldn't be possible for me to be a full-time author. I hope you enjoy reading my books as much as I do writing them. Besides, obviously, reading and writing, I also love cuddling my dogs, shouting at Alexa, being upside down, aka yoga, and driving my family cray-cray. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Goodreads, BookBub. Get in touch at hello@summercooper.com. www.summercooper.com. Closing credits. This has been Bearing His Baby. Written by Summer Cooper. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited. Production copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited.